This is the future. Evolution. This is the future. Evolution.
Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? What is going on, y'all? What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? David Wolf Vlogs. And today is an historical, monumental day as we welcome back home Bob and Doug from the International Space Station. And we'll be watching that live here from SpaceX feed on YouTube because it is not just for watching, but to watch history be made in the process. We are truly living in the future. This is the future of technology. This is the future of space race. We are in the future, ladies and gentlemen. In case you haven't noticed, this is the future.
This is the future.
Into
Human error.
something great, I'm sure. But yeah, guys, stick around. And,
Evolution.
We'll be right back.
Evolution. Alright, y'all. Whoa. Yeah, there goes there we go. Sorry about that. The camera there. There we go. Alright, what's going on? Welcome to the show. This is David Wolf Vlogs. And today, like I was saying during the intro. This is a monumental history. I know that the time frame for the deorbit burn is like 10:40 a.m. and then it's like 2 p.m. when they splash down in Florida, Pensacola, because of the hurricane going up the east coast of Pennsylvania, of Florida. And so the reason why is because of the hurricane going up near Cape Canaveral. They got to do it and land it in the Gulf of Mexico again because of the hurricane. Um, I'm going to bring you that video live just shortly. We're going to be live all day. So you'll be watching SpaceX feed. And go shout out to SpaceX. I just want to say to Elon Musk, congratulations. I mean, it is your team, it is yourself that got us to this history. That got us here. And so, yeah, on behalf of myself and my family, congratulations to SpaceX, to Bob, Doug, and NASA on a successful launch to the station, to the International Space Station. And I know it's going to be a great landing also. So, yeah, guys. So, we're going to cover it live here right now and bring it to you guys live. I'm watching it on my TV. Nothing really much is happening, but you'll catch it here when it does. Okay, so I'll bring it to you guys live. Yep, there we go. All right. All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoy. Like and subscribe if you like my content. And, yeah, let's get it.
have like 40 seconds. Hey, so we are coming up on their wake up in just about a minute or so.
Yeah, so it's been an exciting 24 hours. In case if you're just joining us, Bob and Doug undocked and departed the space station just earlier this morning. Actually, that might have been yesterday at this point. And as of this point right now, they're still sleeping.
Yeah, and as we said, it should be just a couple of seconds actually. We're targeting 4:40 a.m. Pacific time for their wake up. And once they get up, they'll have about an hour to go through what we call post-sleep, so able to get breakfast, just kind of get ready to meet the day, and then it'll be a few hours until things really start to pick up when we get ready to detach the trunk, get ready for deorbit burn, and then move even closer to that actual splashdown, which we're still targeting today at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, bringing an end to this Demo 2 mission.
Yeah, so like we said, we're expecting that wake-up call to happen here in just a minute or so. And it's a really exciting day. It's Splashdown Day. So we're excited to get Bob and Doug up and ready for this momentous occasion.
All right.
Good morning, Bob and Doug. We have a special message for you to start your day.
Good morning, Dragon Endeavor. I'm happy you went into space, but I'm even happier that you're coming back home.
Rise and shine, Daddy. We love you. We can't wait to see you. Wake up, wake up.
Rise and shine, Dad. Me, Luke, Leo, and Mom can't wait to see you, Daddy. Love you.
Wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up. Say wake up. Don't worry, you can sleep in tomorrow. Hurry home so we can go get my dog.
We love you, Dad.
morning, Jay. Good morning to SpaceX, and thank you especially to Jack and to Theo for that wonderful message this morning. Hopefully the pressure's all on whoever's making the weather call, because those boys seem excited to bring us home.
Yeah, we concur. It was great hearing them, and happy to hear you. And lucky for you, weather's looking great at Pensacola. Dragon's also healthy and proceeding towards the primary deorbit opportunity per your timeline. We're going to resume nominal communications at this time. Cameras will remain external, and we are standing by with a system update once you complete your post-sleep activities.
Thank you, Jay. We'll give you a call back once we get things a little bit tidied up here and be ready for that systems brief.
Copy.
Welcome to our live coverage of SpaceX's Demo 2 mission. I'm Kate Tice, a senior certification engineer here at SpaceX at our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. If you're just joining us, Dragon has performed its final departure burns from the International Space Station, and NASA astronauts, our space dads, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, are on their way back home to us. Today's mission actually began back on Saturday, May 30th, when Falcon 9 launched Dragon from historic launch pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Following that successful liftoff, Bob and Doug arrived at the space station just 19 hours later and have been there ever since. While on board station for the last 2 months, Bob and Doug have done over 100 hours of work on microgravity science experiments and performed 4 spacewalks with fellow NASA astronaut and station commander Chris Cassidy. Dragon's return to Earth will mark the completion of SpaceX's second demonstration mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program. This is an important and final milestone which will allow SpaceX to start flying official crewed missions starting later this year.
And it's been a really eventful 24 hours for the Dragon crew, for the International Space Station, just for everybody that's been following this mission. As we literally just heard, Bob and Doug, now awake inside Crew Dragon Endeavour, getting a special message from their sons to wake them up on their return day. So that was just really special. They've been flying free from the International Space Station for almost 12 hours now. Since they departed yesterday, they were able to get on board, pack everything up, and autonomously undock from the space station at 4:35 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday. And after that, Dragon was on its way. It began a series of departure burns to move it slowly up and around the station, and eventually down below and out in front, getting out of the neighborhood, bringing us out of those joint operations, and setting it up for its eventual journey home. We're going to be bringing you our live coverage. We've been going ever since before they got into Dragon, and we're going to continue all the way through to splashdown. Some of the major stuff coming up will be when we jettison Dragon's trunk, we execute the deorbit burn, and then we hit that splashdown, which right now is targeted for 11:48 a.m. Pacific. As Kate just said, off the coast of Florida. We're looking off the coast of Pensacola. One thing to note, we're not going to be able to show you every step of Dragon's journey, as we're going to have sporadic views inside the cabin once Bob and Doug let us back on board, once they're done with their post-sleep period. And there will be a communications blackout that we'll have during the final phases of reentry. And that'll last for about 6 minutes, but Dragon continues flying itself. It's a planned blackout, and we'll see them on the other side.
Yeah, so as you just heard, Bob and Doug are now awake and entering their post-sleep period. So that's about an hour-long period where they're able to get up, stretch their legs, have their breakfast, and get ready for splashdown day. Really exciting day.
It's going to be a really busy day for them. More so on the second side of this, they had to. It's a 19-hour journey essentially from space station to that splashdown, and We do that very specifically. Whenever a journey from the space station to the actual splashdown is longer than 6 hours, we have to build in sleep for our crew members. Otherwise, they end up pulling about 20-plus hour days, and we don't want them going through something as dynamic as that reentry, that splashdown in the ocean.
Got to get rested.
Yeah, got to make sure it's like pilots, it's like anybody else. You have kind of that very strict crew duty day. So they are awake now, though. They got some post-sleep time, and after that, they'll be ready to monitor Dragon the whole way down, because it is going to be pretty much all automated.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll have everything available for them on their screens as they monitor telemetry and attitude and all that good stuff. So yeah, really exciting day as we approach splashdown here in a matter of a few hours, which is crazy to think that this all started 2 months ago and here we are. Time certainly flew by. So while Bob and Doug are now in their post-sleep period, let's check in with the team in Mission Control Houston and NASA's Courtney Beasley. Courtney?
Thanks, Kate. I cannot imagine a better wake-up call for our two space dads. As you can tell, we've changed locations since our teams were on for undocking and departure as part of the coronavirus protections we have in place to protect our flight controllers performing critical operations here in Mission Control Houston. Since Dragon's departure, it's been back to business as usual for our International Space Station flight controllers. We transitioned out of the joint operations after Dragon departed the approach ellipsoid, but have continued to monitor Bob and Doug's flight home. The team here in Houston is still playing a few roles with Dragon's return trip and recovery. Our TOPO, or Trajectory Operations and Planning Officer, is continuing to monitor Dragon's path, on the lookout for any conjunctions or chances of any space debris that could get in the way of Dragon's return. We also have a representative from NASA's Flight Operations Directorate on console to serve as an information clearinghouse for all NASA personnel supporting splashdown and providing input should any changes to return need to take place. There's also our Spaceflight Meteorology Group actively providing weather updates to our two NASA and SpaceX teams together, making sure that the weather in the Gulf is clear for landing later today. And finally, our LSO, or Landing Support Officer, is on standby in the event that we would run into any major issues that would cause Dragon to end up in an unsupported splashdown location, where we'd then call upon support from our Department of Defense colleagues. We'll continue to monitor all the way through splashdown today from Mission Control Houston. Until then, back to you, Dan and Kate in Hawthorne.
All right, thank you so much, Courtney. So we're going to walk you through some of the dynamic activities that are coming up now that the crew is awake. As we said, it's going to be a couple of hours, roughly 6 hours from now, so we still got a little bit of a ways to go. But once we start getting ready for Dragon to come home, there's a very specific set of milestones that will take place. Well, one of the first ones that'll happen is we'll do a slew maneuver, which is essentially changing Dragon's attitude to get it ready to jettison the trunk. The trunk of the spacecraft, if you can think of Dragon, it's kind of two different parts. You have the top part, which is the capsule where the crew is and the cargo, and then you have the trunk, which has the solar array that has been generating all the electricity for Dragon throughout its flight, and also the radiator, which is used to reject heat created by all of Dragon's systems. And we get rid of that trunk before we re-enter. It burns up in the atmosphere, and that reveals the heat shield of the capsule itself. So we'll first do a maneuver at about 10:48 a.m. Pacific, just to get ready for that jettison. Then the claw mechanism will separate. That's what actually connects the trunk to the Dragon spacecraft, followed just seconds later by that trunk separation.
Yeah, then after we jettison that trunk away, we will then maneuver or slew to deorbit burn attitude, and that is essentially putting the vehicle in the proper position for that deorbit burn. The deorbit burn will commence at 10:56 a.m. Pacific time, and it'll last for about 11 and a half minutes. That deorbit burn is essentially placing Dragon Endeavour on its final trajectory to the landing point off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. After that deorbit burn is completed at 11:11 a.m., we will be closing that nose cone. Again, we want to reuse these capsules, and protecting that forward hatch at the top of the capsule is essential, as that is where the Dragon capsule crew capsule connects to the International Space Station, and that's what the crew uses to ingress and egress from the capsule. So we will close that nose cone to protect the hatch for re-entry. Around then, just a couple minutes after that, the Dragon capsule will begin to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So a lot of plasma will be building up on the exterior of the capsule, and as such, we won't be able to command the vehicle from here, but it is steering itself. It is completely autonomous, but we will be experiencing an expected communications blackout, and that'll begin at 11:36 a.m., and it'll last for about 6 minutes. So while that's happening, we will have what's called entry interface. That is whenever the vehicle will begin to experience the aerodynamic pressures and loads of Earth's atmosphere. So that's the really exciting point. And then we will get our communications back at 11:42 a.m. So all of that kind of leading up to the big visual fun part, the parachutes.
Yeah, and the parachutes are going to come out in 2 different stages. We'll start off with the drogue parachutes. Those will do the initial slowing. Now, you have to imagine when Dragon starts hitting the Earth's atmosphere, it's moving about 17,500 miles an hour. That's its orbital velocity as it's flying around planet Earth. By the time the drogue chutes come out, just after that deorbit burn and that reentry, it's already slowed down to about 350 miles an hour. 2 drogue chutes will come out and do some initial slowing of the vehicle and also stabilize the capsule as it continues to descend through the thicker part of Earth's atmosphere. Those drogues should come out right at around 11:44 a.m. Pacific, while the capsule is about 18,000 feet in altitude. Just less than a minute after those drogues are done with their job, they will jettison and they'll actually draw out 4 main parachutes, which will do the final slowing of the vehicle. Those will pop out at about 6,500 feet in altitude, and when the spacecraft's moving only 119 miles an hour, so we've already slowed down quite a bit by that point. Those main parachutes will do the final slowing down before we do the splashdown. It'll be moving at about 15 or 16 miles an hour once it hits the water, and at that point we are looking at it at about 11:48 a.m. Pacific for their splashdown in the Gulf off of the coast of Florida.
Yeah, and of course, the recovery team will be there ready and waiting for Bob and Doug. In preparation for this splashdown, the recovery team has been busy over the last week. One of their big ticket items has been the final selection of the landing site. To increase the options for space station departure, the teams identified a total of 7 possible splashdown locations. Also, in order to meet NASA's timeline for extraction requirements, the potential splashdown locations have to be close to a port as well as medical facilities. So with all of that in mind, add the evolving weather conditions from tropical storm Isaiah, and it's easy to see how determining the landing site is a complex process. Since Dragon is capable of splashdown on either side of the Florida Panhandle, we actually have 2 identical and fully equipped recovery vessels ready and waiting to support. So one is in the Gulf of Mexico and the other in the Atlantic Ocean, which of course will stay there. So the Go Navigator is the vessel that we have in the Gulf of Mexico. And like I said, today we'll be splashing down just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida.
Now, in addition to weather, which has really been the key thing we've been watching over the last, it's kind of been a theme to this mission as we were watching weather so closely for their launch, and we've been watching it very closely for this return. The crew's sleep schedule is actually a really important factor in how we decide how long it's going to take for them to come home and which landing opportunities we're going to take. I mean, every single day, Dragon has multiple landing opportunities that are identified by the SpaceX team, and then those will range anywhere from about 6 hours from station to a splashdown, all the way up to in excess of 30 hours from an undock to a splashdown. So we try to target the ones that are in that sweet spot where we're not going 30 hours from them leaving to getting back home, but we're also going at an appropriate amount of time where they're going to have a sleep schedule in between to make sure they're rested up and ready to go for the actual splashdown itself and all of those recovery operations. Dragon's going to change quite a bit over the course of this reentry. As we said, it's made up of both the capsule and the trunk right now. It weighs in at a little over 27,000 pounds, and that trunk is jettisoned. It'll go all the way about 21,000 pounds. And again, during the heat of reentry, it's going to build up on the capsule. It's going to build up a plasma that'll give us that communications blackout. It's also going to heat up the capsule to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit during that reentry.
Yeah, which interestingly enough, the interior of the cabin will actually remain quite comfortable. There are a number of systems in place to make sure that Bob and Doug won't be heating up along with the exterior of the capsule. They're expected to, I think the internal capsule temperature is supposed to stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit maximum, but there will be cold air flushing throughout the cabin and throughout Bob and Doug's suits throughout the re-entry phase. So they really won't be breaking too much of a sweat during that re-entry period. Also something to note, the exterior of the capsule, as you may, if you followed along with our Demo 1 recovery, will, due to those extreme temperatures, we're basically in the last couple of hours of seeing Dragon in its pristine white condition. After that re-entry, it will come back with a lot of that space dust, essentially. We'll see a lot of the charring on the external sides of the capsule to the thermal protective systems that are basically built to insulate the Dragon capsule and make sure that everything stays safe during that very heated re-entry period.
Yeah, it's going to be very dynamic for them. It's going to be a new experience. I mean, they're experienced astronauts, but this is their first time coming home in a capsule. Both had previously flown on space shuttle missions, so they were used to kind of the glide down of the space shuttle onto a runway. This is going to be their first time landing in a capsule, and this is going to be the first time we've splashed down a capsule with American astronauts in over 45 years. The final Apollo mission, Apollo-Soyuz, making that splashdown back in 1975. So another historical milestone here with this mission that we're going to be taking today. Once they actually splash down in the water, though, we have a combined SpaceX and NASA team that's going to be standing by to recover them. There will be a little over 40 people on Go Navigator, and it's a mix of SpaceX personnel who are there to safe the capsule, get it rigged up to get lifted out of the water and onto the boat, and also some medical personnel along with the NASA contingent, where both Bob and Doug's flight surgeons are with the contingent on the boat there. They are responsible for their medical care before flight, during flight, and after. And so they'll be there just to help them out of the capsule and do their initial medical check right there on the boat before they make their way back to shore.
Yeah. So earlier in the week, Bob and Doug did a couple of interviews from while they were still on station, and one of the questions asked to them was, "Are you nervous about returning?" And they said, "No, we've rehearsed this with the team many, many times, both digitally as well as in person with the recovery team, actually practicing the egress operations from the capsule." So coincidentally, they said they're not worried about it. They're more worried about the health of their family in the midst of the pandemic, more so than the return itself. When I think about the return, I can't help but to think of G-forces. The G-forces that we're expecting them to experience on the way back down is around 4 Gs. They also got around 4 Gs on the ascent portion of the mission, so this really shouldn't be anything that they haven't experienced previously. That is, if you think of roller coasters, that's about what I would say higher level roller coaster would deliver, is about 4 Gs. I tend to avoid roller coasters at all costs, so you probably won't find me in a crew capsule anytime soon. That being said, Bob and Doug, like we said before, have rehearsed this many times with the recovery team, with the mission control operators, and they're excited to come home, and we're looking forward to having them back on Earth.
Yeah, there's not a ton for them to do between now and then. Just a couple of the activities that Bob and Doug will be doing inside of Dragon. They're obviously going to be monitoring throughout the deorbit burn. Prior to that, though, they're going to be getting suited back up. They're wearing those launch and entry suits for all the dynamic phases, obviously for launch. And then they wore them during all the proximity operations around the space station, and they'll be in the suits once more for the actual splashdown itself. And again, those suits are there as just another line of protection for the crew members. Obviously, the capsule keeping them safe in a very hazardous environment of outer space, or burning up on re-entry with all of that heat. And then the suits are just another line of defense. So they'll have those worn. They'll be wearing those during their re-entry. They'll actually do what's called a suit flush just before they re-enter, where they just inject some cooled down nitrox into the suits just to help with kind of that conditioning inside of the capsule. And before they get suited up, they'll be doing what's known as fluid loading. That's very common for returning crew members. You can end up getting very dehydrated, and the fluid loading can help kind of minimize the unpleasant effects of re-entering a gravity environment. It's very common for returning crew members from long duration missions to have some orthostatic intolerance, to have their vestibular system, which is responsible for just maintaining your balance, your motion, to just really be all out of whack. It's the same when you first get on board the space station and you're in microgravity and your inner ear is trying to tell you which way is up, which way is down. It doesn't really exist anymore. And the human body adapts to that when you're up there for several months at a time. And so when you get back down to Earth, it can be a little bit jarring, but that's why we have a lot of trained personnel there on site, ready to help them out of the capsule and for their journey home.
Ground, Jay, if you're ready, we are ready for the systems brief.
Copy. As stated, Dragon's in a healthy state. We are proceeding toward the primary landing site. And your timeline is current to Pensacola. The weather's looking great. Forecasted winds are 1 knot and seas are very calm. We are working an issue with the generator on the recovery ship that has eliminated power redundancy, but we're working a plan to get a backup generator. Even without this resolved, we do expect the ship to be at the designated landing site and no impact to your egress timeline. And that is all we have to report.
Okay, we copy all. That's news about the weather, and I'm sure the folks on the ship will get something sorted out with that generator. Thanks for the update.
Yeah, good readback, and we'll keep you posted as we proceed on the timeline.
All right, so a quick rundown of where we stand right now for Bob and Doug. That was from the core, Jay Aranha, in the mission control room just behind us. The core, just as a reminder, it's kind of like Capcom. If you followed our missions throughout our history, that is really the sole person who's there to talk to Bob and Doug and be their advocate down here on the ground. So as he said, we are still on track for a splashdown today in Pensacola. He gave a couple of those weather details. We're looking at wind speeds of about 1 knot, so just around 1.5 miles per hour, and very calm seas out there. Weather was the thing we were really looking for. And if you checked out some of the information we had online, we were looking for wind speeds less than about 10 miles an hour, so we're well under that for this splashdown today. We ended up getting pretty spectacular weather conditions for this. Obviously, some pretty nasty weather around Florida right now that a lot of people are having to deal with. And 3 of our potential landing zones were actually in the path of that storm.
Yeah, as you've heard us mention before, tropical storm or hurricane, as it was previously referred to before it got downgraded, Isaiah was creating a little bit of problem for us on the east coast of Florida, as like we mentioned before, 3 of our potential landing sites were there on the east coast, ruled out due to unfavorable weather due to that tropical storm. But like we just mentioned, the Gulf of Mexico is looking really good. 1 mile an hour wind, that's like nothing. And with really small waves, Bob and Doug will be very comfortable and safe whenever they do reach the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. The other thing you heard called out there was a generator problem that we're having on the recovery vessel. Basically, there are 2 generators and one of them is down currently, so the team is working on a backup generator so that there is no single point failure on from the generator aspect on the recovery ship. So working that in line, but all good news that everything will be in place on time for Bob and Doug's splashdown, which we're anticipating to be around 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Seems hard to believe that that's still so soon and yet so far away from right now.
Still have a couple of hours, but weather's going to continue to hold. It looks like the system being on the east side or the eastern coast of Florida has created some pretty favorable conditions for us in the Gulf. Just to remind you, we do undock only when we had both a prime and an alternate, so we were able to get good weather. We have several pairings. Since there are 7 different landing zones, you have multiple pairings that you can have. So you could have Pensacola as a prime and Panama City as a prime, or Tampa as your alternate. So you have a bunch of these different options, and we had several pairs that were go at that final go-no-go meeting just about 6 hours before undocking yesterday. The ones that we were able to select was Pensacola for our prime and Panama City for our alternate. If for some reason we did have to wave off today, Panama City would likely be our alternate. We still have about an hour, a little less than an hour, where Dragon has the capability to change that alternate mid-flight if for some reason weather moved in on Panama City and took it out of the equation. But weather's still looking good at both sites. Most importantly, still looking good at our prime site today.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, all of these sites are determined based on the fact that they have to be accessible, so relatively close to shore by the recovery vessel, and also close to medical facilities, so that whenever Bob and Doug are taken off the vessel, that they're able to be close to a hospital and medical treatment if necessary. But like we said before, there were 7 potential sites. 3 of them ruled out thanks to weather on the East Coast, and we are now targeting the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, as our primary landing site.
And once Bob and Doug splash down, a lot of things are going to happen in really quick succession. Just to make sure that we can get the capsule out of the water and get them out of the capsule just as rapidly as possible. Within minutes, actually, the teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne will actually do a check on the vehicle systems following splashdown, and they'll give the go to the recovery teams to proceed. We expect that to be just within a minute or two of that splashdown. The SpaceX recovery personnel will put 2 fast boats, so smaller boats, off of the prime recovery vessel, which itself is about 3 nautical miles away or so from the splashdown point, which is about a 30-minute journey for the boat at the speed it travels. But those 2 fast boats will hit the water and move in quickly on the capsule once they get the go. One of the first jobs that they'll have is to go in and actually kind of sniff around the capsule itself, where they're looking for any trace signatures, vapors of what's known as hypergolic fuels. So Dragon uses hypergolic fuels. These are fuels that you don't need an ignition source to make them ignite. Basically, just throwing them together will create an explosion, which is what a rocket engine firing really is that controlled explosion. So they'll sniff around the capsule for any hypergolics. As long as that comes back a negative, they can move in and start rigging the capsule itself to get lifted up. And I know that's going to be a pretty exciting operation to see.
Yeah, there were actually somebody climbing on top of the capsule itself to perform that rigging. That individual is highly specialized and trained for that operation because, as you can imagine, climbing on top of an oddly shaped capsule in the ocean makes it wet, and so having to get on top of there and secure the rigging in preparation for lifting onto the deck of the recovery ship, that's quite a specific job, and that person has undergone hours and hours of training in order to perform those operations safely. So once that is all done, the capsule will then be hoisted up onto the deck of the recovery ship, and then they'll be placed back down. We'll open the side hatch. So for International Space Station operations, we use the forward hatch, or the hatch on top of the capsule, in order to ingress and egress. For this particular operation of recovery, they will actually be coming out of the side hatch. Once that side hatch is opened, our flight surgeon will pop his head in and make sure everything is good and that they're both feeling good. And then we'll pull Bob and Doug out and have them proceed to the medical tent. So something about these recovery ships, they're actually fully equipped medical facilities. Bob and Doug will both go through a little bit of a screening once they're on deck, and then after that, they'll actually hop on an airplane and get sent back to Texas.
Yeah, for most of our splashdown locations, the crew gets taken off the boat in a helicopter. There is one specific landing zone, and it's the one off Cape Canaveral, which we were at kind of a further one for Demo 1. Demo 1, we splashed down a little over 200 miles offshore. There's a closer one for crewed landings, only about 24 miles offshore. But for all of our other landing zones, it takes probably several hours for the boat to get back into port. So SpaceX does have the option to land a helicopter on the recovery vessel itself to then move the crew members back for a much quicker return to dry land, loading onto that NASA plane and returning to Houston. We get a lot of questions about how we're keeping the crew safe, how we're keeping the crew healthy. We have a lot of very strict protocols in place anytime we send people into space and anytime we bring them home, as spaceflight can be pretty harsh on the body, even with all of the countermeasures that we have developed. A lot of astronauts will come back immunocompromised, and so we really just have to make sure we're taking very good care of them. Especially in our current climate with coronavirus, we've made some additional restrictions and requirements in place for all of our recovery personnel that are going to be on the boat. All have gone through some isolation and testing for coronavirus before heading out to sea. And we're doing this. Anybody that's going to be in close contact with the crew, we're making sure that we have countermeasures in place to make sure that they are screened and that the crew is being kept healthy. Once they get back to Houston, they'll be able to reunite with families and then eventually go home or go to crew quarters there in Houston.
Yeah. So they're certainly looking forward to having their family reunion today. Hopefully you caught their wake-up message earlier this morning, messages from both of their sons, having them wake up. It sounds like there is a puppy in the future for one of our astronaut families, so good luck with that. But something else to note about the recovery process is that all of this is going to take about an hour to do. We want to make sure that we get the capsule out of the water as quickly as possible, but safely, as well as opening the hatch and having Bob and Doug come out and wheeled into the medical tents there. So all in all, it'll take about 60 minutes or so, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing all of that happen live. But backing up a little bit to the events that we have coming up sooner, we will be performing a couple of maneuvers in order to get the vehicle in place and ready for its deorbit burn. That will take place, and then we will close the nose cone in order to protect that top hatch. And then shortly after that, the vehicle will begin to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and then we will have parachute deployment. So all of that is going to be happening around 11:30 a.m. Pacific. So be sure to stick around as we prepare to step into the really exciting events of Splashdown Day.
And throughout the morning, and Leah and Shiva were doing a great job of it overnight. We're going to be taking your questions on social media. If you have a question for us, jump on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll try to get through as many as we can today. We do have a couple of hours until we really start picking up the operations, so we should have a chance to get through quite a few. We'll take one right now. This one comes from Mogster, who wants to know roughly what speed are Bob and Doug going at Splashdown. And it's quite a slowdown.
Yeah, it certainly is. At the point of splashdown, they'll be going about 15 or 16 miles per hour. So that's about the speed that you go in your car whenever you're driving through a school zone. So that slow is how slow that is the speed that they'll be landing in the Gulf of Mexico. A slowdown from 350 miles per hour as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and that's a slowdown from 17,500 miles per hour that they were traveling whenever they were orbiting Earth with the International Space Station. So they
Pretty
are
drastic.
Yeah, very, very drastic indeed. We have another Twitter question coming to us. It says, I saw a video that Bob and Doug's suits were being pressurized in Dragon. Will it be pressurized during reentry? That's a great question. The pressurization that you saw would have been during a leak check. That is the only point in which the spacesuits are pressurized, is whenever we're doing a leak check. We do those leak checks right after the crew puts their spacesuits on, just to make sure that everything is zipped up properly, because those zippers are very specialized in order to maintain that pressurization. So if you got to make sure that everything is on right and everything is zipped up, and we apply that pressurization in order to make sure that everything is fitting properly. We then depressurize, and they're able to lift the visors on their helmets once again. And at that point, the suit is at the same pressure as the atmosphere within the cabin itself.
Yeah, we'll only pressurize those suits, as Kate said, either when we're testing it or if we are in a situation where the cabin loses pressure. So you can kind of think On airlines, they have procedures if the cabin loses pressure where they give you oxygen. Space, a much more extreme environment where not only do we need to provide them oxygen, but we need to give them a pressurized environment, and the suit's able to do that. So they just leave one of the zippers open during the re-entry phase, and if they were in a situation where they were in a depress, they can pressurize it up. All right, we'll do one more. We got one from Mulvey Marathon who wants to know, as someone who needs my morning caffeine, wondering if Bob and Doug can start their day with a hot pouch of coffee.
That is also a good question. I am the same. I like my morning coffee. Unfortunately, there is no ability for Bob and Doug to heat their food or beverage in the Dragon capsule. So if coffee is part of the packaging, the packaged food that they have, because everything is pre-packaged, it is vacuum sealed so that it's easy to stow and easy to consume. The coffee that they would have would be at room temperature coffee, so might not be the ideal type of coffee, but it's safe to say that they'll be able to get their hot coffee in less than 24 hours.
All right, so again, keep sending in those questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll continue to get them throughout our show this morning. We do need to take a moment, though. For those of you watching on YouTube, take a look at the comment section down below. We're going to be switching over our links. We need to stop the broadcast momentarily on YouTube and start a new one just to make sure it gets archived correctly. So we'll be back live at that new location very shortly. If you're watching on NASA TV, no changes needed. Coverage stays interrupted all the way through Splashdown today. You won't notice a thing.
Hello and welcome to our live coverage of SpaceX Demo 2 mission. We are excited to be bringing you live coverage here from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. My name is Kate Tice, a senior certification engineer, and it has been an exciting 24 hours. Backtracking a little bit, Bob and Doug launched to the International Space Station just 2 months ago, and earlier today departed from the International Space Station and began their journey home. They've completed all of the departure burns, and they are now awake and ready to begin the day. So a couple of events that we have upcoming at 10:48 a.m. Pacific time, we will do what's known as slew to trunk jettison attitude, and that's basically positioning the vehicle in its proper place in order to jettison that trunk. We want to expose the heat shield in preparation for capsule reentry. So we will separate from the trunk, and that will be occurring at 10:51 a.m. Pacific time. We will then slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude, and that deorbit burn is what is going to really place Dragon on its final trajectory back to Earth.
Yeah, once the engines fire on that deorbit burn, Dragon is committed to returning home, and that's what really adjusts their orbit to line them up straight with that splashdown zone right off the coast of Pensacola. And so we are expecting that deorbit burn. Times have stayed pretty much solid throughout all the different burns that Dragon has done since it's left the International Space Station. We're expecting that burn at about 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 17:56 GMT. We'll try to give you guys a couple of split times here. That deorbit burn is expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It's executed primarily using the forward bulkhead thrusters on the very top of Dragon. There are 4 of them, and it'll alternate between a couple of them during that deorbit burn. Also using a number of the 12 service section Dracos just to maintain the proper attitude while those engines are firing. It's the longest burn of Dragon's trip home, and again, that's what really commits them. Once that deorbit burn is complete, they are re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So after the completion of that deorbit burn, Dragon will look to close its nose cone. That's targeted to come at about 11 a.m. Pacific time, or 18:11 GMT. And closing up that nose cone is just done to protect the very top of Dragon, where you have the docking ring, some guidance, navigation, and control sensors, and those 4 forward bulkhead thrusters from the heat of reentry. This just helps to aid in Dragon's reusability. This capsule in particular, already slated for another mission. It's going to be flying the Crew 2 crew next year. After we really start to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, things will start heating up. The Dragon capsule experiencing up to 3,500 degrees during this re-entry, and that'll build up a plasma around the spacecraft, and that'll result in what we call a comms blackout. There will be about 6 minutes where we can't talk to the crew on board Dragon, and we can't get any telemetry or data from the vehicle, and we can't send any commands from the ground. This is expected, and this is something that's common in spacecraft. When you're generating that much heat, it tends to interfere with those sensitive radio systems. So we're expecting that to last about 6 minutes. Dragon will continue flying itself using its 3 flight computers and the Draco thrusters on the service section to maintain a very precise attitude as it continues towards its splashdown point off the coast of Pensacola. In the middle of that comms blackout, we'll have something called entry interface. That's when Dragon's low enough in the atmosphere now that it's experiencing aerodynamic effects now. When you're flying around in the gravity of space, you don't experience lift, drag, things like that you now have to worry about once you're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And once they get low enough, it's time for parachutes.
Yeah, so first we're going to deploy our drogue parachutes. These are intended to initially slow the vehicle down, but also stabilize it so that just 1 minute after those drogue chutes deploy, we'll then release the main parachutes. So we'll have 4 beautiful orange and white parachutes, and those will also continue to slow the capsule down significantly, actually just to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour as it splashes down in the Gulf of Mexico. That splashdown will occur at 11:48 a.m. Pacific or 18:48 UTC, and we're coming up to that here in a few hours, so be sure to stick with us as we will be bringing you coverage all the way through that splashdown, in addition to the recovery operations, which, if for our longtime SpaceX fans, the recovery team is really one that we haven't had a chance to showcase really since the last Demo 1 mission, and so it's really great to see this new team in action and being able to perform live all of the stuff that they've been rehearsing with Bob and Doug for the last couple of years.
Yeah, we basically did a test run of this flight a little over a year ago with Demo 1. And Kate and I were here to do the splashdown for that one.
Another early morning.
Another very early morning. Things looked a little bit different. SpaceX actually had both of its recovery ships out in the landing zone for DM1, both the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher. For actual operations, though, those boats are split up. The Go Navigator stays in the Gulf of Mexico, at least for right now, and it's responsible for any splashdowns at the 4 sites in the Gulf. Those are Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee, and Tampa. And then the Go Searcher stays over on the Atlantic side for anything in the Cape, Jacksonville, and the one that I'm forgetting. I'll look it up. But those 2 boats are split up. At any time, one of them will be primed for the recovery operations. And there are about a little over 40 people on that ship to actually recover the Dragon spacecraft and Bob and Doug. And it's a SpaceX and NASA joint team with a lot of different personnel on board. You have people that are experts in the Dragon capsule itself. You have the ship's crew. You have a number of people from the medical community, doctors from both SpaceX and flight surgeons from NASA, nurses, and then you also have cargo specialists on board as Dragon's bringing some cargo home.
Yeah. So if you followed our missions to the International Space Station previously, you might hear us refer to as the maneuvering of Dragon around the station as a carefully choreographed dance. The recovery operations are just like that as well. Whenever it comes to recovering the crew, safety is the #1 priority for not only the astronauts, but the recovery team and all individuals on board that recovery ship as well. So while there are 40 or so people on board, there definitely won't be 40 people on deck. It'll be a strict limitation to the personnel that are in the active recovery operations that will be on the deck, on the recovery deck of the ship as the Dragon capsule is being lifted out of the water and into the nest. So I'm really excited to be able to see that firsthand. We will be, like I said before, we'll be bringing you that coverage all the way through. And after Bob and Doug are brought out of the Dragon capsule, so once the Dragon capsule is placed onto the recovery vessel in that nest, our flight surgeon will pop his head in and make sure that everything is looking and feeling good with our astronauts, our space dads, and we will then have them exit the capsule through that side hatch. We will wheel them into the medical tents, and they'll then get their in-depth medical review with the medical team, and at which point they will then hop on a helicopter and head back to Texas.
Yeah, and I mean, all of that is supposed to unfold in just about an hour following splashdown. Within minutes of Dragon hitting down in the water, a lot of things will happen simultaneously. The Dragon capsule itself takes a number of automatic steps as soon as it detects that it's splashed down. One of the first things that it does will be to detach the parachutes. As once you're splashed down, you don't need them to slow you down anymore, obviously, and you don't want them dragging you through the water. So Dragon will automatically cut those main parachutes, and they'll be sitting there floating in the water. That's also one of the actions the crew can take if they realize that the parachutes haven't detached. They have a hardwired button right there on their control panel to release those parachutes. Within the first 2 minutes of splashdown, the teams will get the go to proceed in closer. The main recovery ship will be about 3 nautical miles away or so, and it'll deploy 2 fast boats that'll get to the capsule much quicker within just those 2 minutes after getting the go. The first boat will move in and do a sniff check around the Dragon capsule, checking for any vapors of hypergolic fuels used to power the Draco thrusters on board the vehicle. Once they can verify that it's safe to approach, they can move in. As Kate was talking about, someone will climb up on the Dragon and get it rigged. The second fast boat is basically a backup for everything that the first boat's doing, and they're also responsible for gathering those parachutes up out of the water. And then it'll take about 30 minutes until the main recovery vessel gets there, and then it's time to lift it up out of the water.
Yeah, so at that point, the capsule will be set onto the platform of the recovery ship, and then we'll, like I said before, our flight surgeon will do those initial checkouts. We'll pull Bob and Doug out, and then they will go into the medical tent. So like I said, that's all going to happen within about 60 minutes is our designated timeline for those operations, and we're really excited to see all of that unfold. It has been a very long morning, night so far. We've been broadcasting for a few hours now, and I don't know about you, but I'm starting, the more that we talk about the parachute deployment and just recalling what that looked and felt like for the Demo 1 broadcast, I'm getting really rejuvenated and really excited to see that with our space dads on board.
And we should be able to show you a lot of the same things you saw for Demo 1. Again, it's a little bit different, as for Demo 1 we had 2 ships out there in the same recovery zone. So we were able to have some of our camera assets, things like that on the other ship. Now it's all on one. But one of the first views we should be able to see will be from a NASA high-altitude research plane, the WB-57. It's going to be once again flying in the area of splashdown. For Demo 1, it was able to get us an infrared view of the capsule actually during that re-entry period, so when it was still glowing very brightly on the infrared as it was still generating and dissipating a lot of the heat of re-entry. Able to see the drogue chute deploys and then the main deploys, and then we'll have some cameras actually down on the boat, on the water, hopefully getting us some great views of Dragon as it descends under those parachutes. So we are looking forward to that. Again, we have about 6 hours or so until the actual splashdown. We're targeting that at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, and I want to make sure 18:48 GMT.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us, Bob and Doug have completed their 8-hour sleep shift. They woke up about an hour ago, an hour and 20 minutes or so. They had a really nice greeting from their sons telling them to wake up, wake up, wake up. And they're now in their post-sleep phase where they're having their breakfast. They received their basically their informational update from the Corps here at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. And so far, everything is looking great, or green, as we say, for today's recovery operations.
Yeah. And so as we continue to monitor the operations today, we do want to keep taking your questions on social media. So we've got a couple that we're going to get through right now. Remember, if you want to ask us a question, get on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. First one comes from Jeff, who wants to know, is Dragon naturally buoyant, or would the ship sink if they open the capsule in the water? It would not. Dragon is designed to stay afloat for at least 24 hours, if not beyond that, but the requirement was just to make sure for 24 hours. It has a ballast system to make sure it's upright in the water following the splashdown. And if the crew had to get out of the capsule before they get on the boat, they have practiced those operations as well. One of the things that we do so often with spaceflight is practice for when things don't go according to plan. We do it through simulations, through practices in the field, through test flights like we did last year. So Dragon capable of getting the crew out of the water, but that's not our nominal plan. The plan is to get them out of the capsule once it's already on the ship. Much more stable environment, a lot easier. You're not bobbing around in the ocean by that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question coming to us from Tardigrads. The question is, how fast will the capsule initially enter our atmosphere? Well, the capsule, whenever it departs the International Space Station, initially is going 17,500 miles per hour, thereabouts. Whenever it is re-entering our atmosphere, it will actually be slowing down to about 350 miles per hour, partially due to the atmosphere itself. That friction building up on the exterior of the capsule will bring the exterior temperature to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is an indication that the atmosphere and the oxygen is actually impacting the capsule and slowing it down. We also have, like we mentioned before, the parachutes that will also further decelerate the vehicle from 350 miles per hour to a mere 15, 16 miles per hour whenever it touches down on the ocean floor.
All right, our next question comes from Arash, who wanted to know, is Crew Dragon Endeavour reusable? It is, and in fact, it's already got a mission signed up in its future. It's going to be flying the Crew 2 crew, which we're targeting for sometime next year. It'll be another international contingent heading up to the International Space Station. We'll have 2 NASA astronauts on board, Shane Kimbrough, who's going to be making another long-duration stay on board the International Space Station, and Megan MacArthur, who had previously flown on STS-125, where she did all of the robotics the last time we repaired the Hubble Space Telescope. And they're going to be joined by 2 international crew members as well.
Indeed. So our next question comes to...
I was going to say, I can tell you who they are real quick.
Go for it.
It'll be European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet and Japanese astronaut Aki Hoshide. So another international crew heading up on a Dragon. Our first international crew is actually slated to launch no later than this September.
This September. Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, we are taking your questions through the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. Our next question comes to us from Suraj. The question is, why is the nose cone hatch still open? Great question, also very observant. That nose cone is currently still open because underneath it rest the 4 forward bulkhead thrusters, basically meaning those Draco engines that sit at the top of the Dragon capsule. We'll be utilizing those to perform the deorbit burn in order to place Dragon on its final trajectory back to Earth. So we can't close the nose cone until we're done using those Draco thrusters because we don't want to damage the nose cone. So we'll wait until that, we'll wait until the deorbit burn is performed, and then we will close and lock the nose cone in preparation for re-entry.
All right, our next question comes from that girl, and already calling for a graphic. The next time you show the orbit map, can you explain what and where things are, especially the lines and the Dragon? So if we can pull up the ground track real quick, what you'll see is pretty much 2 lines, and Dragon itself is on that dot right in the middle of your screen. So it looks like it just passed over Greece and is heading towards the northeast, about to head out over Eastern Europe, Central Russia, and eventually right over Central China. Those lines are Dragon's current orbit. So if you trace the line from the right of Dragon and continue, you'll see it eventually meets up on the other side of the Earth, and then it stops. If you watch the point where it stops, that'll continue to fill in as their orbit continues to go. So this is essentially showing about 2 orbits of planet Earth. And your next question might be, why is it a wavy line? Is Dragon kind of flying all over the place? And that's because the map is spread flat. If you were to actually look at Dragon's orbit on a globe of Earth, it would look like a straight line, but the Earth continues to revolve underneath Dragon. So every time it completes an orbit of the Earth, the Earth is still turning, so its orbit moves slightly to the left, and it continues to move slightly to the left every single time it completes an orbit of planet Earth. This is actually how we figure out where we're going to be coming home and what orbit we need to get Dragon into specifically. So by the time that it's in the right orbit, it'll line itself up perfectly with Pensacola, which is where we're coming home today.
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, you might also notice that the lines are yellow and red. The yellow lines indicate where the capsule is exposed to sunlight, and the red lines would indicate where it would be not in the sunlight or in eclipse, as we would refer to it as. So really great question. Thanks for asking that one. Our next question comes from Jeff. Will there be any live views from inside the capsule before and during re-entry and splashdown? Also another great question. Yes, we will be bringing you views from the capsule where we can. Like we mentioned before, there is an expected loss of signal or a blackout period where we are unable to communicate or receive telemetry or video from the capsule. We expect that to last for about 6 minutes. But here and there, we will be able to bring you footage from the capsule as we're able to receive it. So excited to see Bob and Doug along for the ride.
All right, our next question comes from AJ Nico, who wants to know, is the hatch opening automatic or manual? What kind of system makes sure the hatch opens safely and properly? It is a manual hatch opening. You can open the hatch on either side of the capsule itself, and it's got a number of different locks and mechanisms in place to make sure you're not accidentally opening up the hatch. You can kind of think of it like the escape doors on an airplane, where you have to go through several steps before you can actually, there's not just a handle to turn and open it. You have to go through several steps to physically open the hatch. And there are a number of different configurations in the vehicle you can do to make hatch opening easier. Like one thing they can do following splashdown is actually increase the pressure inside of Dragon's cabin. So it's at a higher pressure than what is outside of the capsule, and that makes the crew's job of opening the capsule hatch outward much easier. So it's kind of, there's some little things that you don't necessarily think about, but it is always a manual process.
Next question comes to us from Klaus. Question is, what is the difference between the capsule suits and the ones used for EVA or extravehicular activity? Yeah, so those EVA suits used on the International Space Station are famously used for spacewalks. Personally, one of my favorite things to watch on NASA TV are those spacewalks. Those suits are designed to operate in the vacuum of space, whereas our flight suits for inside Crew Dragon are not. So we won't be performing any EVA suits in these ones. However, they are designed to protect the crew in the event of a depressurization event. The face shields are able to come down and lock, and we are able to pressurize the suits themselves in order to protect the crew in the unlikely event of a depressurization. That being said, that's the primary difference why, while they're both white and they're both pretty good looking in their own ways, one is much bulkier, and that is because, you know, those EVA suits are designed to essentially do that hard exterior work on the ISS external in the vacuum of space.
Yeah, they're also kind of carrying their atmosphere with them.
Yeah.
With the Dragon suit, you have an umbilical to plug it into the seats. And we have a great video that we've showed a couple of times tonight where a SpaceX suit engineer describes it as kind of a seat system where the suit's able to plug in and draw all of that breathing gas and cooling air, whereas those big bulky EMUs, it's all in their backpack where they bring out all of their breathing gas, their water, which is not only used for drinking for the astronauts, but also for keeping them cool while they're working outside in space. Our next question comes from Max, who wanted to know, do they control the landing location of the ship in any way? If so, how? The astronauts themselves are not, as again, Dragon is flying autonomously, but what we're able to do is actually calculate where Dragon will have an opportunity to splash down, and then we're able to give those calculations to the flight computer so it can then build out what's called a burn plan. You've heard us talk about burns quite a bit, departure burns and phasing burns and the deorbit burn, where the vehicle will itself calculate when I need to fire these engines and how long I need to fire them for to line myself up exactly where I want to splash down. It's incredibly complicated, and only people like Kate are able to do stuff like that, but the crew is largely out of the loop for those. It's mostly done with a lot of support here down on the ground and the Dragon spacecraft itself.
Exactly. Yeah, Bob and Doug's primary role during the re-entry phase will simply to be monitoring the status and the telemetry that is being displayed on their heads-up display there, which I love that view that we get inside of the capsule where we can actually see the screens that they're looking at.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool. Those screens are touch screen, and kind of going back to the question of the suits, our flight suits for inside Crew Dragon are capable of interacting with that touch screen. They are capacitive, so Bob and Doug are able to utilize a really high-tech and easy-to-use screen, as opposed to, if you think back to if you've ever seen like the flight deck of an airplane, or if you think back to the flight deck, the control panels in the space shuttle, where there were a lot of buttons and switches. Now that screen is flat, and we're also able to simply rotate the data that's being displayed depending on what phase of the mission that we're in. So it also cuts down on the bulkiness, the bulkiness of the display itself, because we're able to configure and specialize exactly what's being shown depending on what's going on.
Yeah. All right, we'll get to a couple more questions in just a second. If you're just tuning in, though, welcome. We're about to bring Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley home from their stay on board the International Space Station. They're flying in Crew Dragon Endeavour. They've woken up on board the spacecraft. They're just finishing up their post-sleep, and they'll not have a whole lot to do over the next couple of hours until we really start getting into the meat of the operations. And that's going to start when we get ready to separate the trunk from the Dragon spacecraft.
Yeah, and that's coming up in almost 5 hours exactly. So,
Yeah.
little bit of ways to go.
So we've got some time. That trunk separation is immediately preceded by something called the claw separation, and that's just the attachment fixture between the trunk and the capsule itself. And just to run down some quick times for you again real quick, we're expecting that claw separation at about 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 17:51 GMT, and then just less than 50 seconds later at 10:51 and 54 seconds, the trunk itself will separate from Dragon, and that trunk eventually burns up in the Earth's atmosphere. And then after that, it's on to deorbit burn.
Yeah, so we'll perform the deorbit burn. That'll last about 11 and a half minutes. That burn is what is going to place Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing zone off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Like we said before, they're splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico today. Once we perform the deorbit burn, we will then close and lock the nose cone, as we no longer need to expose those forward Dracos that are used in order to perform the deorbit burn. After that, we will have re-entry of the capsule back into the Earth's atmosphere. At that point, plasma will be building up on the exterior of the capsule. It will be reaching an external temperature of about 3,500 degrees. Bob and Doug will stay very comfortable with a temperate climate inside of the capsule. We have a system that flushes cold nitrox air both into their suits as well as the cabin environment. Nitrox, of course, is just nitrogen and oxygen. It is the air that we breathe. It's also, if you've ever been scuba diving, that's what's in your scuba tank. So Bob and Doug will be getting a lot of this cold nitrox in order to keep them comfortable during that re-entry phase. The capsule will be slowing down from a speed of 17,500 miles per hour to about 350 miles per hour when we begin to deploy those parachutes.
Yeah, first out will be the drogue chutes. There will be 2 of those, and they'll do some initial slowing inside the Earth's atmosphere and really stabilization of the Dragon capsule. They'll deploy, they'll reef just once after they come out, and we'll be under those drogues for a little bit less than a minute, and then immediately following their detachment, the main parachutes will deploy. And there'll be 4 much larger parachutes that'll reef in 2 different stages, and they'll do all of the final slowing. Those drogue parachutes will come out at about 350 miles an hour vehicle speed when they're about 18,000 feet in altitude, and then by the time the mains come out, they've already slowed down to 119 miles an hour, with those coming out at about 6,500 feet in altitude. They'll then be under the main parachutes, which we expect to deploy at about 11:45 a.m. Pacific time, 18:45 GMT, and they'll be under those chutes for a little more than 3 minutes before they splash down at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 GMT.
Yeah, they'll be going only 15, 16 miles per hour when they do make that splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. As I've mentioned before, this re-entry phase will get them about 4 Gs. They'll be experiencing about 4 Gs while they're sitting in their seat. They also experienced about 4 Gs on the ascent phase or during the launch phase of the mission. So really nothing that they haven't already experienced. Also, they've gone through, both of them being test pilots and having flown on shuttle missions, have gone through extensive physical training as well. So they're pretty well equipped to ride what is basically a pretty moderate roller coaster. So yeah, they'll be making that splashdown. Let me just check my timing here. Yeah, at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time or 18:48 UTC. So we are expecting that to all happen here in less than 6 hours.
Yeah, and they are awake. They did get an initial kind of systems rundown from Jay Aronhais, the core inside of Mission Control Hawthorne, right behind us. And as he said, we're not tracking any issues on Dragon. Dragon's been healthy from before undock all the way through its flight. and continues to be healthy for that deorbit burn a little bit later this morning. The only item of note that we had was with the recovery ship with the generator, but we're already hearing that that backup generator is on dock and being loaded on, so everything looking good for Go Navigator to make its way out to that splashdown zone this morning.
Yeah, so all really good stuff happening so far, and we're looking forward to a really exciting few hours here coming up. Again, we are continuing to take your questions through the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. So we'll go to our next question. Comes from Christina. How long will it take for Bob and Doug to be able to walk normally after floating for so long in space?
It definitely varies from astronaut to astronaut. Everybody is different, and everybody tends to react to coming home from space a little bit different. And you can even have differences from if you flew a short duration shuttle mission and then you fly a longer duration, your body could react differently. And it can be pretty difficult to walk once you get on back into a gravity environment. Your vestibular system, which controls your balance and your range of motion and everything like that, can really take a hit when you're going from a zero or a microgravity environment back to a gravity. So some crew members able to walk immediately out of the capsule. Some takes a couple hours until they really get their feet steady beneath them. So it really does vary. But again, we're extremely safety conscious when it comes to bringing these crew members home. So we always make sure we have plenty of personnel, trained medical officials there with them just to make sure they're safe with their return from space.
Absolutely. Something else to note, the astronauts while on board the International Space Station, in addition to doing spacewalks and lots of science experiments and eating and sleeping, they also do a significant amount of exercise in order to keep their bodies in tip-top shape while they are experiencing a microgravity environment. As Dan just said, everybody is affected differently, but one thing is for sure, lots of exercise while in space is able to counteract those effects. So even though it might seem like they're going to the International Space Station and having a leisurely time hanging out in the cupola and taking pictures of planet Earth rotating below, they actually have action-packed schedules and exercises as a really big piece of that. Going to our next question coming from Twitter, comes to us from Ridge Runner. Has the tropical storm influenced the landing site? Yes, absolutely. So tropical storm or Hurricane Isaiah, it was recently downgraded back to a tropical storm, but it has definitely impacted our choices for landing site. Dragon Capsule is capable of landing on either the west coast or the east coast of Florida. We have two identical recovery ships on either coast that is ready and able to support. The decision on where to land actually isn't made until just a few hours prior to departure from the ISS. So it's important that both coasts have the ability to be able to support, but the opportunity that we had for this particular mission, we had 7 potential landing zones picked out, and due to that tropical storm, it ruled out all 3 located on the eastern coast of Florida. So that made decision making pretty clear that we were going to select from our Gulf Coast sites. And after a couple days of evaluation, not only of wind speeds, but also thunder and lightning storms, in addition to wave slope degrees, because whenever you land in the ocean, you're subjected to, of course, the wind, as well as the condition of the seas itself. All of those things taken into consideration to make sure that landing is safe and as comfortable as possible for Bob and Doug. So yeah, I would say that tropical storm certainly had a major impact, but fortunately, today's anticipated conditions for splashdown are going to be very mild, if not picture perfect, with a very low degree slope of those waves and just barely 1 mile per hour wind.
Yeah, we got extremely lucky. We've had to kind of dodge around weather a bunch with this mission. For those that remember the launch, we got all the way down to just kind of the final minutes before launch and had to scrub just because of some storms in the area. And things were not looking great earlier this week. And then we just kind of hit that lucky window. That's why the teams will continue to go down all the way to just the final hours before we undock to try and preserve these opportunities, because weather around Florida, very dynamic. You just really never know. Our next question comes from Jasmine, who wants to know which is more stressful, launch day or splashdown day. That's kind of a personal question. I don't really know which one I'm usually more stressed about. I think splashdown day kind of feels like it lasts longer. Launch is something that's over so quick. You either you did it or you didn't.
Exactly.
Splashdown day, we have a little bit more time. Things take a little bit longer. I don't have a good answer for it.
Yeah, it's something I noticed in the interviews that Bob and Doug have been performing on station for the last couple of weeks. They're not stressed about anything.
Yeah.
They're cool cats up there, and that's partially attributed to not only their personalities, but also the fact that they have done extensive training with the NASA and SpaceX teams in preparation for every element of this mission. Everything from the phases that you go through prior to launch itself, to ascent, docking, all of the mission operations while actually on station and completing the mission objectives for this demonstration mission, and then of course undocking and re-entry. They've done it all. They're not. It doesn't. I never got the impression that they were stressed about anything. My personal response would be, I think, similar. Splashdown has a little bit more dynamic in terms of to the total timeline. Also, it's just it's just so exciting that knowing that we're bringing our space dads home today.
All right, our next question comes from Megan, who wants to know what the difference is between zero gravity and microgravity. It's a good thing to pick up on because it's something that gets kind of confused between the two very easily.
For sure.
On board the International Space Station, and Bob and Doug right now, what they're experiencing is microgravity. So they are actually subject to the Earth's gravity right now, almost the exact amount that we are. When you're on the International Space Station, you're subject to more than 90% of the Earth's gravity. The reason it seems like everything floats for them is because they are in microgravity, and that's because they're in a constant state of free fall. You can actually mimic the exact environment that they have just on an airplane if you fly in a parabola that has an exact deceleration rate as the rate of gravity going down. And one of the easiest ways to kind of visualize it is if you were to stand on a hill and throw a ball as hard as you could. That ball would eventually go out and then it would come back down to earth. And the harder you threw that ball, the further it would go. Now, if you could throw that ball so fast that it was able to just keep going and going and going, that's essentially what they're doing. They're moving at a speed so fast that even though they're falling, they're moving forward too fast to ever hit the ground. So you're in a constant state of free fall, and that's why they experience microgravity. Zero gravity would be the actual absence of gravity. So you would have to be much further away from something like planet Earth, which has a very big gravitational pull, as it is a very large object.
Yeah, great question. Good ears picking up on the difference there. Next question comes from Jason. Will the plasma trail be visible in daylight? Ooh, that's a great question. So what Jason is referring to there is the plasma that will be building up on the exterior of the capsule as it is re-entering Earth's atmosphere. I'm actually not sure if it will be visible to the naked eye because it will be some distance away from the coast of Florida. So I'm not sure if folks on land will be able to see it. That being said, we will certainly we'll be able to provide visual of that. We will have a thermal camera mounted on our WB-57 plane, which will be bringing us live views as it is re-entering. So we will certainly be seeing that plasma tail for sure. But in terms of being able to see it with the naked eye, I don't believe so because, like mentioned, it will be occurring in the daylight.
All right, so we're going to continue taking those questions throughout. Again, just keep using the hashtag AskNASA. If you're just now tuning in, things haven't quite picked up yet, but Bob and Doug are awake on board Dragon ship Endeavour and awaiting really just all of the activities that are coming up in a couple of hours. And we'll run down a couple of key times for you just to know when it's really time to pay attention when things are heating up. So we're going to start off the operations a little bit later today with our trunk separation. And this is when we'll essentially split Dragon into two different pieces. The trunk will detach from the capsule. The trunk burns up, in the Earth's atmosphere, exposing the capsule's heat shield for its eventual re-entry. Before the trunk can separate, we need to get Dragon in the appropriate attitude and do something called a slew, which is just a maneuver to correctly orient Dragon for that trunk separation. That's scheduled to take place at 10:48 a.m. Pacific, 17:48 GMT, just a little under 5 hours from now. Then the claw will separate. This is what actually connects the trunk, and through a number of fluid and other quick disconnects to the Dragon capsule itself, that claw will separate, followed shortly after by the trunk itself, and we're looking for that trunk separation at 10:51 a.m. Pacific, 17:51 GMT.
Yeah, so after we get that separation, we will then position the vehicle into the appropriate attitude to begin that deorbit burn. Excuse me. The deorbit burn will last about 11.5 minutes, and that deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory, really pointing it home to its landing spot off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. So once that deorbit burn is completed, we will then note that that's not actually the re-entry phase. That's just the trajectory positioning. The nose cone will be closing at 11:11 a.m. The forward bulkhead thrusters, the forward Dracos, are what will be used to perform that previous deorbit burn. So once those are no longer needed, they'll be safed, and we'll lock the nose cone and make sure that that forward hatch located there is well protected for the re-entry. The capsule will then begin to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, and at 11:36 a.m. Pacific or 1836 Universal, we will have an expected communications blackout. Like I said, there will be plasma building up on the exterior of the vehicle as it will be reaching temperatures towards 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So we will have a communications blackout period or loss of signal, and that will last about 6 minutes. During that time, we won't be able to command the vehicle or receive telemetry. That being said, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous, so it's driving itself anyway. At 11:36 a.m. in the middle of that communications blackout, we will have entry interface. This is when the capsule is essentially beginning to feel the aerodynamic forces of the Earth's atmosphere. We'll get those communications back at 11:42 a.m. Pacific or 18:42 Universal. We'll get those communications back, and we'll do a comms check with Bob and Doug, make sure that they're doing good and feeling okay. And then at 11:44 a.m. Pacific, we will begin the parachute deployment. So we'll deploy the drogue parachutes, those 3 parachutes that are designed to initially continue to slow the vehicle down. They will also stabilize the vehicle so that we are prepared for the main parachute deploy. Those main chutes will come out at 11:45 a.m. Pacific on the dot, or 18:45 Universal. Those main parachutes will further decelerate the vehicle down to about 15 or 16 miles per hour, and at that point we'll have splashdown, and we'll be looking to confirm that at 11:48 a.m. Pacific. So once splashdown occurs, the recovery team will move into place and really have the moment where we get to pull our space dads and welcome them back to Earth.
Yeah, it's only expected to take about an hour from the moment of splashdown until we have them out of the capsule on the boat. A number of things have to happen before that takes place. Within about the first 1.5 to 2 minutes, Mission Control Hawthorne, so the flight controllers right behind us, will give the recovery teams the go to proceed. As they're still getting telemetry or data from the spacecraft even after it splashes down, they're able to make sure that we don't have any fuel leaks or anything like that, and just make sure things are as safe as possible before additional personnel approach the capsule. There will be 2 boats that go in, 2 fast approach boats. The first one will get there and do a sniff around the capsule for what's called hypergolic fuel that's used to power the Draco thrusters around the Dragon spacecraft. After they're done with that sniffing, the second boat will be able to move in. It acts as a redundant boat for that first fast approach boat and is also responsible for getting the parachutes out of the water. Following all of that work, they'll give the go for the main recovery vessel to move in. It'll be waiting just about 3 nautical miles away from the splashdown point.